Good morning. So much work took place over the weekend. I did some edging to Michael-proof the beds up front and did a lot of spreading of the manure and more seeds in pots and some direct sow. Starting with a new variety this year. It's a scarlet runner bean, and I didn't read the package. You know, most beans are warm weather. This bean, like the fava bean, enjoys cool weather, but I went ahead and did a direct sow here anyway. And I'm going to run that vine up over the wheelbarrow and into that azalea bush. And it said that if it gets too hot, it will shut down its production, but then when fall sets in, it'll start again. And I'm doing this just for the greenery, for the biomass, and I can't wait to see those gorgeous red blooms. Anyway, the basil, hummingbird sage, and all of that is, you know, has some growth on it, so now you could see it in the beds. Beautiful blue bedder sage, the domestic blackberry, the blooms are starting to come. Now, a couple weeks ago we were on a scout, and it's the perfect time to do this, is to go out and look for those white flags, all of those white blooms along the roadsides, next to the tree line. That's typically where the blackberry grow, and it's, you know, there for the taking. I picked nearly 200 pounds last year, so I went on a scout and found a couple new patches for that. Lettuce, the last of it that I didn't harvest, is still hanging tough. Swiss chard looking great. Endive filling out, and the endive bolting very nicely. Love those purplish blue flowers that happen on that demu endive. So I went a little heavier on the manure where that strawberry patch is going to spread out. And I have a little bit more clearing out of the wildflower patch. There have been some volunteers happening that I could identify. And then I also did a direct sow of some giant sunflowers here as well. These staked tomatoes are the Russian emerald apple. And in between every plant, I did a direct sow of the borage. The borage is a good companion plant for the strawberries and tomatoes. The ampias filled out very nicely, and I might prune a couple of these limbs back, but we have blossoms, quite a few blossoms on it already. The scarlet runner bean that I just spoke of, I put some here, and I'll direct that vine up over the stairs, and then I did another one here, and I'll direct it up over the deck. And while I'm here, I'll point this out. This is Florida Betony flowering, and I learned this from Eat the Weeds, and actually did the collection of the rootstock while I was in Mead Gardens with him last year in Florida. And this plant is a wild edible, and underneath the soil, its root, it's a knotty white caterpillar looking root, and it is edible. So I put it in this pot to make sure I knew where it was and to see if it would overwinter here, being that it came from Florida and the winters are a lot more mild than they are here. So it came back, and once it stops flowering, I'll get those roots and spread those roots around. Maybe do another pot, and also put it on the property to let it take off. The turnip is still flowering, and funky little seed pods developing. These will have white flowers on the parsley, and the seed pods on the broccoli, not broccoli rabe, Romanesco broccoli are nice, filling out, and also the dinosaur kale. And like any pod, you really want to make sure beans and mustard greens have a very similar pod like this. You want to make sure that it turns brown on the plant, and when you apply a slight bit of pressure, it'll pop open, and then you know it's ready to take off. And they're real easy seeds to collect because they're perfectly round, and they roll down your tray and separate from the plant material. Everything's looking quite nice around the pond area, nice and lush. And let's see. Oh, I'm doing a very large black futsu squash. That's going to be my ground cover for around the bottom of the tomato plants to help retain some moisture. And I'm going to do some direct sow of those as well. And that'll help me really retain the water in the mid-afternoon for this area to give the tomatoes really consistent water supply. They'll split. Larger varieties of tomatoes will split if they don't have a consistent water supply. So the lychees are flowering back there, and all the volunteers, I put some along the bottom. And here we have the early crookneck yellow squash, one in the pot, a runner bean in that pot to take over this side, and this is a large Italian squash. The citrus plants, the citrus trees transplanted really well too. The apple trees that I put in, they're kind of taking a beating, but hopefully they'll do fine. All right, I have the cucumbers in pots. They were about a week behind these cucumbers, which are filling out really nicely. There's my hand. Most vining plants are pretty dramatic growth. There's a potato, purple potato sprouting there. And over the deck bed, I put in that Caribbean amaranth. And these are all volunteer amaranth here. These are the Love Lies Bleeding, and they just showed up in a pot that was on the deck. So I put those in here. And here's one that's just sprouting right where it should be. And a tomato volunteer. Now that the beds are getting a little bit more consistent watering, we'll see how many volunteers I get. And we tilled up this area, this grassy area, to allow the strawberry patch to expand, but to also utilize the fence line so I don't have to stake these volunteer lychee tomatoes that I put in along there. And the subarctic plenty tomatoes are staked. And this is one of the apple tree transplants. We got some fried leaves and we got some green leaves. Hopefully he'll be happy there. And the strawberry patch is producing, even though it's a quite small strawberry patch, is producing about a cup a day. Sometimes a cup and a half. The one day I got 2 cups. And the seed collection, I asked Helio Forge for some advice on that because I was scraping them, and he collects them after he makes a smoothie. So I took the partially eaten berries from the rodents out here in the garden and the ones that had started to turn bad, and I just ran them through my little chopper like I do the eggplant seeds with some water and do the sink and float method, and I got hundreds of strawberry seeds now. All right, here we have a Alibaba watermelon. There's 4 plants that were put in, and I'm going to do some direct sow and have this whole area being taken over by watermelon. And I'm also going to do a cantaloupe this year. Got some nice colors showing up in the wildflower patch. And I've been burying the potatoes. And last year I had cleared this bed and amended it, but I never planted it. It just became, the property just became too much with how the watering system was set up. But I've got the landlord on giving me more spigots outside, and I took some of the funds from the artwork sales and bought, hoses, splitters, timers, So I'm going to plant this area with herbs and medicinals. This year it should do good. And even though this was planted last year, it didn't do really well because of how hot and dry it got. I still had flowers, black-eyed Susans and bachelor buttons, and there's actually a lot of volunteers. That green in there is are the volunteers. So the manure was totally spread. We ran through the pile of manure, and it has been worked in and tilled and retilled. I'll rake all this down and start with my direct sow this week. My nighttime temperatures are more consistent, high 50s and 60s. So I'm pretty much ready to rock. With the black, green, Hopi squash are all doing really well. Let's give you a zoom in on that. I don't want to cross over the fence. And the white flowers are cilantro. Tiller, I left it out last night. Didn't have it in me to haul it. And gorgeous color on the Sensation mixed color tobacco left over from last year, volunteers from last year. I am growing lime green tobacco that started indoors, and I'm going to have to make sure that I pull all of the flowers, the plants, the tobacco, so I don't get a cross. All right, we're looking good. The garden space the soil is actually starting to come around. Some places are richer than others, and that is going to determine what I put where. This front place up here is a little bit darker than that spot right there. So my heavy feeders go into the darker soil. All right, I'm going to kick it into high gear and continuing doing the artwork for a couple more days. The Liberty Love Fest is on the 28th, so I have a couple more days to produce a few more pieces maybe to get that out to them for their silent auction for their fundraising event. So it's the same as usual here. Lots of irons in the fire and, trying to enjoy it. So hope all is well with you, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.